as well as personal. So what about this idea? You find already in the book of Isaiah that there was a belief that time would come to an end. Now, we take this for granted, growing up in our tradition and having the Jewish tradition weigh so heavily on Western culture, that there's a moment when history will expire. And if you look at the end of Isaiah and other places, there will be a cataclysm. The moon will be brighter than the sun. The earth will somehow go through a great catastrophic transformation. Zion will be the highest mountain. We'll see a change in human nature. Lo yisa goy el goy chereb. No nation will lift up sword against another nation. We will see a change in animal nature. That the wolf will lay down with the lamb, etc. The question is, why would people believe that there would be this cataclysmic end of times? That would reshape the nature of the planet, reshape time, reshape the cosmos, and reshape human conduct. So this has perplexed scholars, and there's no one answer other than that the end of the kingdom of the end of the Jewish Commonwealth. Remember, the kingdom of Israel was destroyed in 722 BCE by the Assyrians, which had a profound effect among the remaining tribes, Judah and Benjamin, because they really thought there was an eternal covenant. Now, when Judah and Benjamin fell in 586 BCE to the Babylonians, it's hard for us to imagine that we had relied so securely that there was an eternal covenant between the God of the universe, who also played the role of the God of Israel, that the covenant would actually be abrogated. Not that the covenant was at an end, although some thought that it had come to an end. The part of the covenant that guaranteed our living on what was the land of Canaan had come to an end, and the reason being, I'm taking you off the land because you did not live up to my covenant. That's a very clear message. By the way, the horrors that came at the end of the First Temple period is not in my ability to think this is from God, but rather people theologically trying to make sense of this carnage visited upon God's people. It could only have come because we did not live up to the covenant. I'm trying to think of any nation in the world that has ever lived up to the covenant that we imagine existed between God and the people of Israel. So when that happens, when as it were, the covenant is abrogated, it's as if, and remember, this is from their perspective, at some level history had been about the people of Israel. You know, there's a straight line from Adam down through Seth, down through Noah to Abraham. Whatever else was happening in history, they saw themselves at the core of history, and when their history was over, world history was over. Yes, it's a rather self-centered way of seeing the world, but I think this is a rule of thumb. All religions are self-centered unless they teach otherwise. All religions are self-centered unless they teach otherwise. I think many religions today say we are all refractions of the divine light through our different prisms. I think that gets over the self-centeredness of religion. But there are many jokes that I know about each religion thinking it's the own religion. So up in heaven, as we're visiting all the churches, we have to be quiet when you tiptoe past these people because they think they're the only one up there. Well, that is actually pretty indicative of religion. So they thought the world had come to an end. So one was cataclysm. Another thought that this human evil, the failure of society, the human beings wallowing in immorality was the end, but there had to be an extraordinary event that would save us from ourselves. Hence, messianism. So one kind of eschatology is everything's going to be changed in a catastrophic way. You'll see this at the end of Jeremiah. Other images of eschatology mean study of the end of times. Eschaton means end, logos means study. You'll find in Isaiah 2, you'll find in Isaiah 9, Isaiah 11. They have a much different view of history, is that there will be a unique event when the Messiah comes and people will change their ways. Now, every year at one time or another, people ask me, do I believe in the Messiah? So we've shared with you that we've had the Siskin family at our Seders as long as we've had Seder. Stephen Siskin was one of our first presidents of Or Torah, a beautiful man. He moved to New York, got married, and had one kid after another. Would come and visit his family in Southern California every year during Passover time. So they became regular guests at our Passover Seder. His children, who are now 19, 17, 15, 14, and 10, have attended our second night Seder their entire lives. Now, I just would say to me, Rob, hey, who's coming for Seder? The Siskins. Oh, the Siskins again. It never occurred to me from their perspective, that's what Passover is. Passover is second night. You're at the Finley's house. So, yeah, I don't think I realized how significant this was to the Siskin children. And of course, I've seen them grow up from infants to a 19-year-old boy and a 17-year-old girl, each very different. And now I have different relationships with each of them in each of their spiritual paths. And the questions they asked me, one day they woke up and said, oh, we have a rabbi in the family. We get to ask him every question there is. And for the past few years, because they go to an Orthodox day school. And so they compare their Orthodox day school to me, right? And we have long discussions that I typically don't plan to have during Passover, but that's what it's become. So I want to share you one tiny discussion where one of them, Lila, says to me, but do you actually believe in the Messiah? The Orthodox tradition says Mashiach is coming. Do you actually believe in the Mashiach? Yes or no? Rabbi Finley. I said, okay, here's how it's going to happen. One day, you're going to wake up and say, I think I'm not going to commit any crimes today. I don't know why. Just don't feel like committing any crimes. The person gets up and says, you know what? I'm going to actually marry this woman I'm dating and not get her pregnant before we're married. I'm going to make sure I have a job and marry anybody before I have a kid with them. Another person gets up and says, I think I'm going to work for a living. The whole world, everybody depends on people going to work, putting down sidewalks and streets and buildings. And, I'm just going to quit loafing around. I'm going to get on the workforce. And people say, I probably should stop drinking. I'll do whatever I can. And suddenly people wake up and there's no crime. And children grow up with two parents. And people help and work as much as they can. People try to get off addictions. As the Mishnah says, suddenly people are pretty okay with what they have. And if they think things are unfair, we have a ballot box. We don't need to get mad at each other. Everything can be worked out through the ballot box negotiation. We all just calm down. And the Messiah is going to be walking around incognito, and people are going to be saying, how did this happen? And the Messiah is going to be chuckling under his breath. It was me. I did this. Don't tell anybody. So the Messiah is going to be walking around for people. What are they doing so uniquely? They're actually acting like human beings. So my theory of the Messiah is one day people are going to wake up and actually act like human beings are supposed to behave, and that will be the coming of the Messiah. My private theory. The kids bought it. They said, yeah, that's, either this Messiah comes with great fanfare, a cavalcade, horses and trumpets, or the Messiah comes quietly and everybody just changes their nature. So I prefer number two. Okay. That's my few minutes of Torah on my theory of what happens when the Messiah comes, being it during Pesach or Sukkot or whatever. A little preface, last night I spoke my great distress on what's happening in campuses. I won't do that today. I did it, that was my sole topic last night. It should be up on YouTube pretty soon, and I think it's called Bringing Light to the Darkness happening in our college campuses. It's a very serious issue. There's a lot to do. But we don't need to cover this every single time we meet. What I want to do is at least start by talking about this idea of intimacy with the divine. Now, for many people, the idea of intimacy with the divine is not a difficult concept. However, throughout my entire professional life, people have expressed to me their difficulty with believing in God, and if they can believe in God, what that means in the sense of a personal God, what that means in the sense of hashgacha pratit, does God look over me? What happens if I feel I have a personal connection with God? Do I know God? Does God know me? How does that change one's life? So again, this is another discussion I had with one of the Siskin children. So this talk today is to Discussions with the Siskin children. Oh, that'll be the name of our discussion. And they really wanted to know, do I believe in prayer? Do I believe that one should pray to God for things that you want? Remember, they go to an Orthodox school where they are taught that you ask God for things that you want, etc. So I said, look, if you're willing, I want to give you the whole theory. Because if I only answer your questions, I'm giving you tiny pieces of the theory, but I want you to see how the whole thing fits together. And they said, okay, give it a shot. So I want to give you a brief version of the whole theory. This whole theory belongs in book length. Maybe I'll do it. But here's what it looks like. And again, this will go up on YouTube. And if you ever want to follow this and be able to explain it to another person, I have found that people find it maybe coherent, even if they don't agree with it. At least it's coherent and logical and understandable and doesn't include great so-called leaps of faith. So here's my beginning place. My beginning place is always that I am a moral realist. Now, during the time after October 7th, I again repeated so directly and deeply this crucial idea of being a moral realist. So I'll repeat a bit of it again. Whenever a person asks a moral question, and moral questions typically have to do with harm inflicted by another person, and if there are exculpatory reasons for the harm, which mean it was unavoidable, it was necessary, something about harm, intentional harm, avoidable, unnecessary, to another person is wrong. That's the root of all moral theory. Any harm against another person, and again, the caveats are, is it avoidable, unnecessary, etc.? Sometimes there is, but in general, is wrong to harm other people. And then the answer is, why? Let's say you all agree. Now, the subjectivist will say, oh, wrong is just a word. Everybody means it subjectively. It's wrong for them. You've heard this before. Now, wrong for them has nothing to do with the word moral. Moral means living by a code not of your own making. That's something worth memorizing. Intrinsically, moral means living by a code not of your own making. So, for example, I said, right for me, wrong for me, right for you, wrong for you. That's just will. That's just desire. Why dress it up in the garb of morality? If something's wrong for me, don't do it. If something's right for me, do it. But that's not contained in the word moral. What's contained in the word moral is a code not ultimately created by human beings that we ought to live by whether we want to or not. That's what a moral code is. So one says, no, moral is moral for me, for you. That's called subjectivism, and it's not morality. That's just desire and will. I will and will do the things good for me and not good for me, etc. The next objection is, isn't all morality a social construction? I mean, is it not a construction of the mores of a given people at a given time? They're not really right or wrong, but they reflect the mores of the people. And no set of mores is better or worse than another set of mores. There's no real right or wrong. There's no morality. There's just mores. So they say there's no better and worse because it's also a social construction. You've heard my response. I will ask people using our history, is a world in which a more accepts slavery morally worse or better than a culture that outlaws slavery? Because there was a time in our country when our mores accepted slavery. Now, some hated slavery and fought against it, the abolitionists, and some were tolerant, they didn't like it, and other people quite enjoyed it. Now, is a civilization, is a nation better, morally better, without slavery? I said, are you against slavery? I would ask my typically young people, in all places at all times. Generally speaking, are you against slavery in all places at all times, and is it better? Now, here they're hard-pressed because their belief that all mores are simply reflections, social construction of reality, now I've put them to the test on something that I already know they know, which is slavery is morally wrong. I go through many other tests, including then, if it's all mores, how do mores change? How do we go from a slave-holding nation to a non-slave-holding nation? How do we go from a nation where women were not allowed to vote to a nation in which women are given the permission to vote? It's clear there's been moral progress. It's not just difference, it's actually progress toward a moral ideal of human equality. Now, if I have enough time with the person inevitably will have to say, yes, there is moral, and there is right and wrong, or at least better and worse answers to moral questions. That's true. And then I go into rights. Do human beings have rights? And again, they say it's a reflection of mores. And I say again, then why don't we just hit the status quo in 1800 and not understand rights moving beyond that? Or have we made moral progress as we expand the understanding of who has rights to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and equality under the law? Now, the movement is not simply movement on a vertical line, it's movement up toward a greater moral ideal. So oftentimes, within about 40 minutes, I can establish that there are better and worse answers to moral questions, that there is some kind of moral law. I say I don't know what it is, I don't know what to call it, other than it is the criterion for the fact that there are better and worse answers to moral questions. That's what I call it. They want to jump on me and say, are you saying God? Are you saying God? I said, I never said the word God. You can use it. I don't. But I want us to establish that we all here believe that slavery is worse than non-slavery. We all believe giving the right to vote to all citizens is worse than depriving women of the vote. We all agree that it's morally better, not just different. I don't let people back away from that. So I said, I don't know what all the moral questions are. I don't know what the answers are, but I know that it's a moral question. I don't say it's an historical question, a sociological question. It's a moral question. Now, that has to be foundationally rooted. And by the way, that's one of the things our college students don't have. Our students, when they go off to college, do not have a deep, clear sense of moral realism that includes human rights and have it deeply, so they would never, ever stand around people who call for genocide. They'd be as embarrassed as I am to be an American. I'm embarrassed to be an American when I see our institutions tolerate this. I'm embarrassed to be an American that I see hundreds of college students say, yeah. I think to myself, they probably come from decent families. They probably come from bourgeois families where people worked for a living and paid their taxes and were nice to people when they could be. And now they're standing around people who talk about genocide, and they don't feel repugnance and embarrassment about the human condition. No, they're okay. Why? In my mind, they haven't been inculcated with a deep, penetrating, overwhelming sense of moral realism that some things are wrong, like murdering innocents. Now, they can go ahead and say, Israel and Gaza, well, why is it wrong? Because Israel's killing innocents. Thank you. Therefore, burning Tel Aviv to the ground would be wrong as well. They say, yeah, but that's because I said, we judge cases individually. We don't believe in mass murder. Now, there are all kinds of ways to talk about it. At least when they agree, every single human being has the right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. There's no justification for October 7th. And say, if you want to talk about Israel's response, let's talk about it. But are we discussing as moral realists that there really are better and worse answers to moral questions? That's, before I talk to anybody, I have to establish that. I hope you take the time to establish it as well. I think if our students knew that, it wouldn't be so easy to have them believe these sham ideas of postmodernism, neo-Marxism, et cetera. They would be inoculated from these terrible ideas that are incoherent, but they're not inoculated. They don't believe anything, so they'll believe anything that someone's going to push their way. That's the first step. Intimacy with God, in my mind, for someone who's coming from nowhere, as I was. I mean, I didn't grow up with any religious sensibility at all, at least a formal one. This became clear to me. Now, my next question is this: is this metaphysical force that establishes the criterion between what is morally right and wrong. Is it conscious? By the way, many of you have taken this journey with me before. It occurs to me to teach it again with your forbearance. Is it conscious? Now, there's no evidence one way or the other, and now we have to go into trusting human experience. Now, human experience is only trustworthy if you trust the person reporting it. This is not something empirical that you can replicate in the laboratory. It's something that a person feels deeply and is not reductionist. So when I've shared with people, I've had deep experience of God's presence, they say, oh, that's nothing but your human imagination. That's nothing but you're perceiving something in yourself that you're ascribing to the universe. A friend of mine called this the nothing buttery. That whenever you feel something deep, they say, oh, it's nothing but. So I say, it might be, but it might not be. And if you say, since there is no God, Finley could not have been experiencing God, that's your nothing but, your experience, that is nothing but a projection of yourself. I said, but how can you prove that? So I don't take the onus of proof on me. I put the onus of proof on them. And that I want you to do. If you've had deep experiences of God, and you say to people, I can call it the divine, hamakom, as our tradition likes, the place, the space. The name you give it, it does not matter when we're talking about an experience that all spiritual people, all mystically oriented people can share. When I share this experience, the other person who knows what I'm talking about can say, I've had that experience as well. Or a person can say, I've heard of that experience, I believe it can happen. As opposed to the person who says, that's impossible to happen, you're delusional. I said, okay, so you're not in this conversation. But there's a big subgroup of people who've had this experience, or want to have the experience, or don't doubt the experience. That's the subset of people that I'm talking to. We've all had this experience. Is this metaphysical force conscious, pushing forward? Is it conscious of me? And can I be conscious of it? Is it conscious of me? And can I be conscious of it? Now, again, this relies entirely on human experience. I believe, as you know, that we ought to cultivate our being able to experience the divine and cultivate our ability to feel the divine experience us. For people who do not experience the divine and who do not feel the divine experience us, from my perspective, that's an issue of training and pedagogy. I believe that anybody, if they put in the training, can experience the divine, and anybody, if they put in the training, can experience the divine experiencing us. I believe that to be true, all things being equal. Now, what prevents it? Well, I will say, first of all, I'll say I know people, not including me, that seem to have been born with a great spiritual sensibility. It's as if we all have the five senses, and there's a few other senses that we'll call the spiritual sense, and other people were born with that sense in place. And the rest of us have this sense in potential. We're not born with it activated, but we have it in potential. Now, you've all known people, and some of you are here today, who have this spiritual sensibility relatively developed when you came into the world. And you folks that I'm talking to, one problem that you've had in life is making sense of other people who can't see what you see, who can't hear what you hear. Because you know you see it. You know you hear it. You know it's there. Sometimes it is more real than the physical objects in your room, in your place. You know it as deeply and maybe more deeply than you know anything. And we are perplexed that other people can't feel it, see it, or know it. It can be a bit of a lonely experience until you find other people. Well, they'll say, yes, I feel that, I've seen that, I've heard that, I know that. This is real, you're not crazy. That can be one of the most important experiences in the life of a spiritually gifted person. By the way, I want to mention a book by Steven Pinker, who's probably the most gracious and thoughtful of the proclaimed atheists. And I think Steven Pinker's an atheist because there's language he hasn't mastered, where he talks about his atheism. But on the other hand, he realized there's a large subset of humanity, very bright, intellectual, logical people who believe in this presence. And Steven Pinker says something amazing at the end of one of his books. He says the following: there is a time when human beings, like other mammals, were colorblind. That's what he says. I don't know if it's true, but for example, dogs are colorblind. That's what he says. And then at some point in evolution, some primate became what we call the human being, and boom, color kicked in. And he's trying to imagine the first human beings for whom color kicked in. And they're trying to describe it to other people, and they're not able to. And then there's a large combination, there's a large group of people who can see color, and the other people just can't see it, and they can't be explained to it. Now, some people say you people are delusional. Color does not exist. Other people say, I kind of know what you mean, and I wish I could too. Could you teach me? And there's a group that say, I refuse to believe it. Steven Pinker acknowledges it could be. Remember, he's the most notable, I think the most kind, gracious, and intelligent of the atheists out there. He says, I could be wrong. It could be that I'm colorblind. And the people I spent my time debating, they might just be human beings that have been able to develop the ability to see colors that I don't. I'm going to grant that. And it might be these people who can see the word spiritually are the next step in human evolution. Wow, was I astonished to read that by Steven Pinker, the most avowed atheist. Perhaps people with a spiritual sensibility are the next step in human evolution. I was very touched when I see it. I know I've been able to, as it were, see color since a certain age. And I believe that every human being can. And I remember once I suddenly saw in vivid color that one of my jobs as a human being was to bring people to what I can see if they would like to see it. So we go from being a moral realist, that there is this metaphysical force, that we can be conscious of it, it can be conscious of us, and that we can cultivate the skill, and we can actually grow in this mutual consciousness. It's not static. It's something that we human beings have to do. And last two things I'll say here. Why is that? Because there's a natural part of our human being that does not want to admit of the full implications of knowing the divine and being known by the divine. Some part of us does not want to live up to that. Meaning, this moral, spiritual force of the universe knows you, you know it, and we forget. We forget what difference it makes. We forget the honor code that we have to live by. I mean, with this comes an honor code. We forget what it means, what it means to treat other human beings. There are so many parts of what I call my ethic. First of all, the ethic of human interaction, my ethic of human speech, my ethic of our own place in our interpersonal moral development. So much of my ethics, my values, comes from this, because when I look at another person, I hope to always remember there's a divine spark in them trying to manifest, and am I helping it or hurting it? So when you argue with people, when you debate people, when you treat people cruelly, you are, I think, diminishing your own divine spark and diminishing theirs. Is there a way to disagree where our divine sparks are actually brought out? I mean, if the light of God is the human being, heard me say this frequently, are we living in ways to coax that light out or to dim that light? So with this comes, briefly, an honor code. Now, I will call that honor code the substantive part of the moral teachings of any religion. Every religion experiences this light, this force differently. And part of the way a religion ideally experiences this light is an honor code. We'll call this the ethics, Jewish ethics, Christian ethics, Islamic ethics, etc., which means the character, the moral and spiritual character of the adherent to that religion. I just want to add one more thing, that when people experience this, a cultural force takes over, and that is to regularize and develop the experience. We'll call this the ritual side of any religion. And so when I was asked, do I believe that Shabbos comes from God? Is it a commandment from God? I have a complex answer. What I say is, I believe in the moral criterion. I believe that it knows me, I know it. I believe I have to grow in this knowledge. I believe in the moral and spiritual code I have to live by, now having had this knowledge. And I believe those who preceded me in my culture had understandings from the divine, that this has to be enshrined in many places in our culture, including space, time, etc. Now, does it come from God? It comes from the experience of God. If one truly has experiences of God, you want to enshrine it in time. Now, I don't know if God said every seventh day, or whether people said, we better enshrine this every seventh day, or people are going to forget. They're going to forget who they are, what's up, what's at stake. Let's make sure every single week we come together and talk about this thing that we all know. Maybe that's how it happened. Maybe a person got a revelation and said, you know, that source of the universe that I know, it knows me. Yeah, well, it actually says every seventh day we got to do this. People say, are you sure? I'm pretty sure. Let's just do it and see what happens. They go, wow, it actually helps us. It helps us a little more spiritually. So I don't know the exact divine role in creating what I'm going to call the radii that come out of that core experience. For us, it has to do with rituals in time, rituals on the body, for example, talis, tefillin, etc. I'm going to call rituals of the inner life, mostly tefillah, the recitations and other things that we say, for me, which are all about cultivating the inner life. Certainly our moral code, our life of study. I don't have a complete theory of all of it, but my theory of it, ideally, all of it was created by spiritual masters who said, we're afraid we're going to forget who we are and what's at stake. And therefore Shabbos and holidays and the moral code we live by, enshrined by parts of the Torah, and the continuous study of our text, because that will only bring us, at least some parts, in deeper and deeper in touch with this source heart of the universe. Now it comes down to us, which is my last thing I wanted to say to the child inquiring of me. I said, I'm not an Orthodox rabbi, and you have Orthodox rabbis. I'm not telling you what the actual right path is as a Jew. You know, how much Shabbos, how much holidays, how much Torah, how much rituals. I don't have an answer. Meaning, if it starts as one and then refracts into different religions and refracts down through a religion, at what point you might say, is the stasis that is quote unquote right? Far be it from me to judge others. Far be it from me to say, well, you do too little and you do too much, which is what people keep wanting me to do. But don't you think they go overboard? But don't you think they're being lax? I don't know. I don't know. But what do I know? I do know it's real. And if you don't do something about it, you'll forget. And if you don't do something about it, it won't be transformative. It won't make any difference. So my view of this is kind of called a natural religion. It addresses not my theological side a little bit. It addresses my nature as a human being. Meaning there's my human nature, and then there's this that I'm allowing to shape my human nature. Now, not just this, but how my ancestors and worldwide people have shaped this experience, which is why I studied Christianity and Buddhism and philosophy. They all have something to say about how this force has shaped their life. So I want to study widely, and I want to take down what I can and ask myself, as honestly I can, will this teaching help me in this search, in this life? And so I'm open to any teaching, but my home base clearly is Judaism, where I'm working this out in the most depth. So to our Torah reading, which enshrines the intimate moment between God and Moses, and according to our teachings, holidays create that intimate moment. For me, this stands for the entire set of ideas that I've shared with you of what I think is our human calling to go from the moral code to knowing God, being known by God, setting up an intimacy with God, and then setting up a life where all of this is presented to you day after day, week after week, so that the raw human nature that we are given is refined to something that is nothing more than, for me, a life of holiness. All right, that concludes my my talk for this morning. And as usual, I always have room for one or two questions before I take a little break and move on with the concluding parts of our service. Anybody have a question or thought about any of that? Yes, Helena, please. You are unmuted.
Oh, good. Last night I couldn't be. And we had an incredible discussion after the service was over. I don't know if you got to hear some of it.
Bits of it.